"I'm not pretty," the widow whispered, but the cowboy replied, "Honest lasts longer." The rope bit deep into her shoulder as she dragged the pine log uphill, breath turning to smoke in the air. Wind knifed through the valley, lifting gray ash from the scorched ground of Ash Hollow, where trees once stood before the fire, took them all. Mara Keene leaned forward, boots digging into frozen soil, the hem of her calico dress torn and stiff with mud. Each step scraped the silence raw. From the ridge above, a man on horseback watched. His name was Elias Ward, rancher of Silver Creek, 3 miles south and a lifetime apart. He had seen men break easier than this woman. When the log slipped and rolled back, Mara caught it with both hands, teeth bared, refusing to yield. Elias dismounted, snow creaking under his boots. "You'll break your back that way," he said. "I've carried worse." She answered without looking up. Her face turned toward him, then left cheek marked by a long, pale scar, eyes steady as riverstone. "I'm not pretty," she whispered. "That's fine," Elias said quietly. "Pretty dies quick in these parts. Honest lasts longer." The wind shifted, carrying their breath into the coming storm. Ash Hollow lay 30 miles north of Clearwater Bluff, a town so small its single street disappeared beneath snow half the year. By late October of 1883, the valley carried the smell of smoke and iron. The great fire that had swept through the foothills last summer left behind acres of black stumps and soil that crumbled like old coal. Yet in the midst of it, someone had staked a claim, raised half a cabin, and planted a flag of stubbornness against the wind. That someone was Mara Keene. She had come here with nothing but a mule, a trunk, and the rumor of a past no one wanted to hear. Townsfolk called her cursed, the scarred widow who burned her own house down. She hadn't bothered to correct them. The truth was messier and lonelier, a husband's rage, a lamp shattering, flames climbing faster than forgiveness. When she escaped, her skin bore the proof, her reputation, the sentence. Now, she worked from dawn until the stars rose, shaping logs with hands blistered and raw. Each strike of her hatchet echoed through the hollow like defiance. Inside her canvas tent lay the fragments of the life she refused to surrender: a charred nail from the old house, a threadbare Bible, and a water-stained copy of the Odyssey she still read aloud to herself when the wind grew too loud. To the south, Elias Ward rode fence lines on his ranch, Silver Creek, where the snow melted just enough to feed a dying stream. Once, he'd been known for his discipline, his fine horses, his beautiful wife Evelyn, whose laughter carried across Sunday gatherings. 2 winters ago, both she and their newborn were buried under the same patch of frozen earth behind the house. Since then, he'd spoken little beyond the language of workhammer, saddle, brand. Men in town respected him. Women circled like buzzards, whispering "Poor Mr. Ward" with painted lips. He'd stopped listening long ago. Loneliness had hardened into habit. That was before he saw the woman on the ridge. Something about the way she fought that log, the fury. The will reminded him of a time before silence, when he learned she was building alone in Ash Hollow. He saddled his horse the next morning and rode north through sleet. By dusk, the wind carried the promise of snow, sharp as salt. Mara stood outside her unfinished cabin, tying canvas over the open roof. When Elias approached, she looked up but did not reach for her rifle. "I told you I can manage," she said. "And I told you a roof won't stand without bracing," he replied, eyes scanning the crooked frame. They faced each other beneath a sky the color of iron. 2 lives stripped bare by loss. 2 souls who had run out of people to believe in. He removed his gloves and offered his hand. I'll bring nails and timber at first light. You'll have a roof before the snow." Mara hesitated, then nodded once. The wind between them felt like a pact. Morning crept pale and sharp over Ash Hollow, frost clinging to the half-cut logs like lace. Mara was already working when Elias returned. A small wagon behind his horse stacked with fresh boards and a tin pail of nails. She watched him approach without a word, the rhythm of her hatchet steady as heartbeat. "You're early," she said when he stopped beside her. "Storm's building fast." He gestured toward the distant mountains, where clouds were folding over the peaks like heavy blankets. "You'll need that roof within a week." Mara only nodded. He expected her to be wary, most women would have been, but what surprised him was how her eyes didn't flinch. She looked at people the way others looked at weather, measuring what might break first. They worked side by side through the day. He set the posts. She steadied the beam. The silence between them wasn't uncomfortable. It was the silence of two people used to talking with their hands. By noon, sweat darkened the collar of his coat, and the smell of pine sap hung thick in the air. Mara brewed coffee over a small fire, pouring it into a tin cup with the ease of someone who had done without company too long. "You build well," he said after a while. "I've had time to learn," she answered, handing him the cup. Her fingers brushed his glove. "Rough meeting rough. No one else was going to do it for me." Elias took a sip, grimacing at the bitterness. "You might have asked for help." "From who?" she said, voice flat. "The same folks who call me a witch behind my back, or the merchant who offered to save me if I'd marry him." He looked up. "Beckett." Her gaze flickered, just once. "He doesn't like being refused." Elias said nothing. He'd dealt with men like Beckett before, the kind who measured decency by how many witnesses they had. He set the cup down and went back to work. By late afternoon, the sun turned copper and thin. They had framed one full wall. Mara stood back, examining it as though judging a stranger's face. "It'll hold," she murmured, half to herself. Elias leaned his weight on the hammer. "For now. But the wind in this valley cuts from two sides. You'll need crossbeams here and here." He knelt, drawing lines in the dust with a carpenter's precision. She watched his hands, large, capable, but gentle in movement, for the first time. She felt something unfamiliar creep through the walls she'd built. Safety. Maybe. Or its quieter cousin. Trust. As the sky dimmed, they sat by the fire eating bread and beans from the same pan. Sparks leapt into the dusk, vanishing before they reached the stars. Elias studied her face in the flicker light. Beneath the scar, her expression was calm, but her eyes carried the same wary depth he'd seen in wild horses ready to flee if approached wrong. "Why come here?" he asked softly. "Ash Hollow's cursed ground to most." She poked the fire with a stick. "Ground's just ground. People put the curses on it." He smiled faintly. "Fair enough." Mara turned the stick in her hands. "And you, a man with land, cattle, and a name, why bother helping someone?" The town already buried. Elias stared into the flames. "Because I'm tired of liars in nice dresses. Because honest work's the only thing left that makes sense." For a long time, neither spoke. The wind pressed against the canvas walls like a living thing. Then Mara said, quieter than the fire's hiss, "You don't know what folks will say. I don't care what they say." He answered, "I care what holds." The fire cracked, throwing sparks between them, brief, bright, gone. Somewhere in the dark, a wolf called from the ridge, its cry echoing through the hollow. Mara looked toward the sound, and for the first time since he'd met her, Elias saw her smile, not soft, not shy, but alive. When she turned back, Her eyes caught his across the firelight. Then we'd better make sure it holds. The days bled one into another, stitched together by the rhythm of labor, morning frost on the axe handle, the echo of hammer against wood, the scent of sawdust mingled with smoke. Each sunrise brought new repairs, new small victories. Elias worked with quiet patience, the kind born of long grief. Mara matched him blow for blow, her body lean with the determination of survival. By the fourth day, the cabin's skeleton stood true. They shared fewer words but more understanding. He began to notice the things she never said, the way she touched her cheek when someone mentioned fire, how her breath shortened when thunder rolled across the hills. She noticed, too, the way his eyes lingered on distant things, the outline of the ridge, the spot on the horizon where the graves behind Silver Creek would be. One afternoon, the wind came hard from the north, driving stinging pellets of ice. They worked through it, shoulders hunched, until Mara's hands split open at the knuckles. Elias caught her wrist before she could hide them. "Enough," he said. "I can still swing," she protested. He took her hammer gently, wrapping her hand in his bandana. "I didn't say you couldn't. I said enough for today." Her eyes met his. For a moment she wanted to pull away, but his touch was steady, respectful. She let him tie the knot tight. "You talk like a man who used to command," she murmured. "Used to," he said. "Now I just fix fences." The storm broke at dusk. They took shelter inside the half-built walls. Mara cooked venison stew from what she'd trapped earlier that week. The smell filled the room, warm and wild. Elias sat across from her, boots steaming near the fire. "I never asked," he said. "What made you buy land this far out?" Mara stirred the pot, eyes on the flames. "Because no one else wanted it. Because it was burned like me." He didn't answer, but the words settled somewhere deep in him. After supper, she reached into her trunk and pulled out a water-stained book, The Odyssey. "You read much." "Not well. I can teach you," she said. "Why? Because you helped build my roof." She replied simply, "Seems fair to build something for you too." So she read aloud. The ancient words filled the little space, blending with the crackle of pine. Her voice softened around the syllables, smoothing their edges. Elias listened, half to the story, half to her breathing. When she reached the part about Odysseus coming home in disguise, her throat tightened, but she kept reading. Outside, the wind howled through the timbers. He added another log to the fire. "I've got extra hides in my wagon," he said, "for insulation." "You keep bringing things," she said quietly. "Why?" He thought about it. "Because you never ask." That night, snow began to fall slow at first, then thick as feathers. They worked the next morning under a white sky. Mara laughed once, softly. When Elias slipped on the ice, it startled them both. The sound had been gone too long. By mid-afternoon, they finished the roof frame. Their breath turned to fog, mingling in the cold. She braced the beam while he hammered the final nails. A flake of snow melted against her neck, and she shivered. "You're freezing," he said. "So are you. I've been worse. So have I." They looked at each other, half smiling through their breath. For the first time, warmth spread between them that had nothing to do with the fire. That night, the snow turned to a storm. They pulled a canvas tarp across the roof, tied it down against shrieking wind. Inside, the fire flickered low. Mara's hands trembled as she reached for the kettle. "You should leave before it gets worse," she said. Too late for that. He tightened the tarp ropes, snow already climbing past his boots. "If I ride out now, I'll end up frozen before the ridge. I'll stay here." Her face went still. There's only one blanket, then we share. She said nothing more. When darkness fell, they sat side by the fire, the blanket draped around both shoulders but not touching. The blizzard screamed outside, a sound like the world being stripped clean. Mara opened her book again, voice low. Penelope waited 20 years, she read. But her heart never forgot the shape of truth. Elias listened, not understanding every word, but hearing something older than language. Sometime after midnight, her head drooped against his shoulder. He froze, not daring to move. Outside, snow buried the world. Inside, something fragile began to unbury itself. At dawn, light seeped through the cracks. Mara stirred, realized where she rested, and sat up quickly. He met her eyes, but said nothing. Then his gaze shifted toward the doorway, nothing more than a frame draped in canvas and hardened. "What is it?" she asked. "Tracks," he said. "Someone circled the cabin during the night." Her hand went to the rifle leaning by the wall. He reached it first, checked the chamber, then handed it to her butt first. "Looks like the storm's not the only thing watching us," he muttered. Through the gap in the canvas, faint prints wound down the hill, 3 sets of hooves disappearing into fog. The storm thinned by the next morning, leaving the valley blanketed in white. From the ridge, Ash Hollow looked like a wound sealed over by frost. Mara stood in the doorway of the half-built cabin, her rifle slung across her shoulder, studying the faint hoofprints vanishing toward Clearwater Bluff. The wind had already begun to erase them. "They'll come back," Elias said quietly behind her. "Men like that always do." Beckett's hands. He nodded. "One of them, at least. Harlan Tate likes to earn coin the dirty way." Mara's jaw tightened. "Then he'll earn a bullet next time." Elias didn't argue. He knew that tone. He'd used it himself once. The following days passed heavy with silence. They worked longer, faster, trying to finish before another storm hit. By the week's end, the roof stood solid, the chimney drew smoke, and the cabin, though crude, was finally something like shelter. Still, Mara kept glancing toward the tree line, listening for hoofbeats. One morning, a rider appeared on the ridge, a boy from town, coat too big for his bones. He dropped a crate at the door and turned his horse without a word. Elias called after him, but the boy only urged his mare faster. Mara knelt to unfasten the lid. Inside were sacks of flour and coffee and a folded note pinned to the top. Beckett's handwriting. "Come to Clearwater Bluff. There's still work for an honest woman. Leave the arrangement. Save your name." Her hands trembled just slightly before she set the note into the fire. The paper curled, blackened, vanished. "He's trying to scare me back into his cage," she said. Elias crushed the ashes with his boot. Let him try. But that night, neither slept. 3 days later, they rode into town for supplies. Mara refused to hide under a hood. "If they're gonna talk," she said, "let them do it to my face." Clearwater Bluff lay still under a thin sun. Church bells echoed down Main Street, where Reverend Silas Dunn stood flanked by elders. When Elias dismounted beside Mara, every head turned. Murmurs rippled like dry leaves. The Reverend's voice rang out, "Mr. Ward, have you forgotten the dignity of your own name, bringing sin into our midst?" Mara's chin lifted. "Sin I built a house, I work my own land. Tell me which commandment I broke." Dunn's gaze flickered to the crowd. The one of pride, perhaps, of tempting a good man. From the steps of Beckett's Mercantile, Charles Beckett emerged in a fur coat and a smile too soft to be honest. "Mara," he said smoothly, "my offer still stands. Come work for me. Leave this misunderstanding before it ruins you both." The words coiled around the crowd. Elias felt their eyes burning holes through his coat, women whispering, men smirking, for a heartbeat. He thought of his wife, of appearances, of the years spent trying to be the man others approved of. He felt that old fear rise, choking. "It's just work," he heard himself say. The cabin's nearly done. The silence that followed was louder than any shout. Mara's breath caught. Her hands slipped from the reins. When she looked at him, there was no anger, only the cold clarity of understanding. "I see," she said softly. "Then our work's finished." She turned, mounted her horse, and rode out of town without another word. Elias didn't follow, not right away. He stood there, snow swirling around his boots, while Beckett's smug grin widened and Reverend Dunn muttered prayers loud enough for all to hear. That night, Elias sat alone at Silver Creek Ranch. The fire burned low, throwing long shadows across the empty room. He poured whiskey into a glass but couldn't bring himself to drink it. Outside, wind moaned through the fence lines. In his mind, he saw her face when she'd looked back, scar catching the light. Eyes full of the truth he'd been too cowardly to speak. By dawn, he saddled his horse and rode north. The trail to Ash Hollow was half buried in drifts. When he reached her land, smoke no longer rose from the chimney, only footprints small, deliberate, led from the cabin to the frozen creek. He followed them until they disappeared among the reeds, then turned back, heart heavy with something he couldn't name. Snow began again, slow and relentless. The next day, Thaddeus Boone arrived at Silver Creek. The old rancher didn't dismount, just looked down from his horse, his voice sharp as barbed wire. "You look like hell. Boy, I earned it. Good. Maybe now you'll do something with it." Boone leaned forward in the saddle. "That woman built more with burned hands than most men with whole ones, and you let her stand alone because you were afraid of gossip." Elias said nothing. Boone spat into the snow. "Your wife wanted fine things. This one wants truth. You gonna let fear win twice? What if she won't forgive me? Then you'll deserve that too." Boone wheeled his horse around. "But at least you'll have tried." When the old man disappeared into the white, Elias stood long in the cold, snow melting on his lashes. Then he looked toward the hill where Eveline was buried. The cross of cedar still stood, half buried. "I'm sorry," he said quietly. "Sorry I couldn't give you what you wanted, but I can't keep pretending." He turned toward his horse. "It's time I said the truth out loud. By Sunday morning." The church bell rang again. The townsfolk gathered, expecting another sermon. Instead, Elias Ward stepped into the aisle, hat in hand. "I'm here to confess," he said, his voice carrying over the pews. Reverend Dunn stiffened. "Mr. Ward, no." Elias interrupted. "Let me speak." He faced them all. "You call Mara Keene sinful because she built something you couldn't understand. She didn't tempt me. I failed her. I chose your approval over her truth. And I won't do it again." Silence rippled through the room. Even Dunn lowered his eyes. Then a voice from the back spoke, a young ranch hand, Harlan Tate, hat crushed in his hands. "Beckett paid me to follow her," he said. "Paid me to lie about what I saw." Gasps broke out. Dunn turned pale. Elias nodded once. Then the truth spoken. "That's all I came for." He walked out before anyone could answer. Outside, the snow was beginning to thaw, the world dripping back to life. He swung into the saddle and rode north toward Ash Hollow, each hoofbeat a heartbeat, steady and sure. Ash Hollow lay quiet beneath the thaw. Patches of earth showed through the melting snow, black and wet like open wounds. The cabin stood against the gray sky, smoke barely trailing from its chimney. When Elias rode into the clearing, the horse's hooves sank deep, water pooling in each step. Mara was on the roof, hammering shingles into place. She didn't stop when she saw him. He dismounted slowly, boots sinking in the slush. For a long moment, the only sound was the rhythm of her hammer. When it stopped, the silence was heavier than any storm they'd shared. "You shouldn't be here," she said finally, not looking down. "Maybe not," Elias answered. "But I'm here all the same." She struck the next nail hard enough to bend it. "You came to finish the job, or to ease your conscience." "Neither," he said. "I came to build something right for once." The hammer slipped from her fingers and clattered down the roof. She sat back, breath clouding in the chill. The town must be proud. Did they forgive their wayward cowboy? "I didn't ask for forgiveness." His voice was steady, though every word scraped raw. "I went to church to confess, to tell them what I should have told you first." She glanced down at him then, eyes narrowed against the weak sun. "And what's that?" "That you were the only honest thing I've had in years." The wind caught at her hair, tugging it loose from its braid. "Words are easy, Elias. You proved that in town." He took a step closer, the mud sucking at his boots. "Then don't listen to words. Look at what I do next." Mara stared at him for a long time, then turned away and went back to hammering. "Hand me that other plank if you're staying." He smiled faintly, set his gloves aside, and climbed the ladder without another word. They worked side by side, breath visible in the cold air. Neither spoke again until the roof was finished and they sat together on the ridgepole, looking out across the valley. The sky was clearing, the first blue they'd seen in weeks. Elias's voice came quiet. "When I stood in that church, I told them the truth about everything, about Evelyn, about fear, about hiding behind what people call decent." He stared at the mountains far off. "I told them if they wanted to judge someone, judge me, not the woman who built a life from ash." Mara kept her eyes forward. "And what did they say?" "Nothing." For once, they listened. The silence stretched. Down below, the creek cracked and shifted beneath the ice. She exhaled slowly. "You risked everything to tell them that." "Why?" "Because I'm tired of being the man who stays silent." Her voice softened, almost unwillingly. "You think one confession fixes what you broke?" "No," he said. "But maybe it's the first nail in something stronger." She turned to look at him, then really look, and saw what the winter had carved into him, the gray at his temples, the new hollows in his face, the steadiness in his eyes. There was no apology left there, only truth. "I don't need rescuing," she said. "I know. I've survived worse than gossip. I know that too." He shifted, meeting her gaze fully. "But I wouldn't mind a partner. Equal share, equal say." The air hung still between them. Then Mara extended her hand, calloused and scarred. "Deal," she said. He clasped it. His grip was warm, grounding. For a moment neither moved. Then he leaned closer, giving her time to pull away. She didn't. Their first kiss was quiet, the kind born not of hunger, but of understanding. When they climbed down, the sun had slipped behind the ridges, casting gold over the snowmelt. A wagon rolled into the hollow, followed by two, then four more, families from Clearwater Bluff, men with timber, women with baskets of food. Reverend Dunn climbed down from the lead wagon, hat in hand. Mara froze, but Elias touched her shoulder. "Let's hear them out." The Reverend's face was pale with shame. "We were wrong," he said. "A few of us thought, it's time to mend what we broke." Behind him, Townsfolk began unloading supplies. No speeches, no excuses, just hands at work. Even the children carried shingles toward the barn foundation. From the rear wagon, Thaddeus Boone swung down, boots splashing in mud. "Told you they'd come around," he said, squinting at Elias. "Took you long enough." Though, Elias grinned faintly. "You were right." Boone spat into the slush. "Course I was. Now grab a hammer before the sun quits." By dusk, laughter and hammer blows filled the hollow. A new barn rose beside the cabin, the smell of fresh-cut pine thick in the air. Mara stood back, watching it. All the same people who once called her cursed, now working to raise her walls higher. Elias came to stand beside her, sleeves rolled to his elbows. "You all right?" She nodded. "I don't know what to call this." "Call it a beginning," he said. The last light of day glinted off the nail she held in her palm, a blackened one, salvaged from her old house. The single thing she'd kept all this time. She walked to the cabin's doorway, lifted her hammer, and drove it into the beam above. The sound rang through the valley like a bell. Elias watched, understanding without asking. Mara stepped back, brushing a tear from her cheek. "That's for the past," she said softly, "so it stays where it belongs." He touched her shoulder gently. "Then let's build what comes next." Night settled around them, warm with the sound of voices and the smell of wood smoke for the first time in years. Ash Hollow wasn't a place of ghosts, but of people of hands, of laughter, of second chances. And as the stars blinked alive over the mountains, Elias and Mara stood side by side, watching the barn's frame catch firelight. It glowed like something sacred, something earned. The wind carried the faintest scent of spring. Spring came late to Ash Hollow. For weeks, the ground stayed stubborn, holding tight to the memory of ice. But when the thaw finally came, it came all at once, snow sliding from the hillsides in white rivers, the creek breaking open with a roar, the smell of wet earth rising like breath after a long silence. Mara woke one morning to light spilling through the new windows, warm and gold. For a moment she didn't move, listening to the steady crackle of the fire, to the faint snore from the chair beside the hearth. Elias had fallen asleep there again, boots still on, hat tipped over his eyes, the way he always did after working too late. She smiled. There was no awkwardness now, only the kind of ease that grows after storms. He stirred when she moved, blinked once, and smiled back. "Morning," he murmured. "Morning," she answered, pouring coffee into a tin cup and handing it to him. "You planning to build the whole county before breakfast?" "Maybe," he said, sipping the bitter brew. "I've got a partner who doesn't know how to quit." Outside, the valley had turned to color. Patches of wildflowers pushed through the black soil, purple, yellow, white clinging to the burned slopes where nothing was supposed to grow. Mara stepped outside barefoot, letting the damp earth chill her toes. Elias followed, watching as she knelt by the garden plot they'd started weeks ago. She pressed a seed into the soil and covered it carefully. "What are those?" he asked. "Beans, potatoes," and these she pointed to a thin row at the edge for color. "Wildflowers again. They belong here," she said. "They come back no matter how many winters try to bury them." He nodded, crouching beside her. Their hands brushed as they worked. There was no rush now, no weight between them, just the quiet rhythm of shared purpose. A sound broke the stillness. Hooves on the trail. Elias turned. A single rider approached Charles Beckett, hat in hand, his fine coat dulled with dust. He reined in a few yards away, not daring to come closer. "Mara," he began, voice strained. "Mr. Ward, I came to apologize." She stood, wiping her hands on her apron. You came to see if I'd forgotten. He hesitated. I misjudged you. You didn't, she said evenly. You saw what you wanted to see. There's a difference. Beckett lowered his head. Still, I wish you peace. You have it, she replied. Now go. He left without argument, disappearing down the trail, smaller with each step until the trees swallowed him. Elias exhaled, relief and admiration mingling in his chest. You didn't even raise your voice. I don't waste breath on ghosts. He reached for her hand, rough against rough. Then maybe it's time we talk about the living. She looked up, the light catching the faint line of her scar. What are you asking? I'm asking you to marry me, he said softly. When you're ready. Could be tomorrow. Could be years. I'm not going anywhere. Mara studied him, seeing not the man who'd once flinched from judgment, but the one who had learned to stand in truth. Ask me again, she said. When the wildflowers bloom full, I want to say yes, when the world feels alive again. He smiled. Then I'll wait for the valley to turn purple. That evening, they sat on the porch bench he'd built for her, the sun dipping behind the ridges. The air smelled of pine sap and new grass. Their cabin, their home, now glowed with the first lamplight, golden against the coming dark. Elias rested his arm along the back of the bench, not touching her, but near enough. You know, he said, voice low. You're beautiful. Mara touched the scar on her cheek, smiling faintly. I'm scarred. Same thing, he said. Scars prove you fought and won. She looked out over the hollow, where the first wildflowers shimmered in the dusk, small and stubborn, reaching for the light. Pretty fades, Elias murmured. Fancy breaks. But honest holds. She finished for him. The stars came out one by one above them, patient and old. And beneath that wide Wyoming sky, the scarred woman and the quiet cowboy sat together, watching their valley bloom, proof that even from ash, life could root again.